And that's part of the social worker's mind. I can't sit back and say, I could have helped you, and I chose not to.
Welcome to Clicks and Bricks Podcast. We talk about the entrepreneur mindset.
If you get one shot at this, what kind of shot are you going to take?
If we forget who we are, they're going to forget who you are.
You've got an adversity story that's out of this world.
Everything from that Main Street brick and mortar to that billion-dollar manufacturer.
Shelly, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Ken. How are you?
I'm pretty good. You're the founder or the co-founder of Corey's Network, Inc.?
I'm the co-founder and the mother of Corey.
Okay. Before we jump into Corey's Network and your background there, and you tell us all these stories, can you tell the audience just a little about you, who you are and where you're from, and a little about your background before Corey's Network comes to fruition?
Sure. I am Shelly Norris. My friends call me Shelly. And I have a bachelor's in social work. I have a master's degree in organization development psychology. And I also have a master's in management with an emphasis on fundraising. I've got 35 years in social work. The background in that is varying from running 2 shelters for abused and battered women. I ran a residential facility for adjudicated youth. I've worked in Department of Corrections for the Missouri State Department of Corrections. I've also been the manager for the truancy and dropout department for the Kansas City, Missouri School District. And I was also a case manager for that. So I had 26 years legally before I started Corey's Network in social services, mostly in the emphasis of working with people that had negative backgrounds. And by that, I mean they were drug dealers. They could be anywhere from autistic all the way up to murderers and rapists. So it just any kind of an issue in their past, or they could be abused and battered people. So it just varied depending on what my background was at that time or whatever I wanted to do at that time. I've also investigated sexual abuse. I've had a very strange, kind of a path that if you look at it, it kind of winds back and forth depending on my age at the time and what my interest was at that time.
Right. Okay. And then how many years ago did you found Corey's Network?
Started Corey's Network 8 years ago in June of 2014.
Right. And I have a feeling that this next part's going to be a little emotional. Can you tell us why Corey's Network exists today?
Corey's Network is an advocacy program. And what we do is we provide immediate support and counseling for the surviving victims of homicide. We also help to engage people with understanding the investigation, helping them understand their court processes and navigate the media, as well as helping to pay for the funerals. When you ask someone why would they found a homicide victims advocacy program, and why is it named a specific name, it's going to be a very obvious answer, and that is Corey was my son. Corey is still my son. Corey was murdered in 2013, July. He was walking home from a quick trip about 2 blocks from my home and was walking through an apartment complex. And as he was walking through the complex, he ran into an associate. And this associate, whom he'd let sleep at his home before he moved back in with me, whom he'd fed, whom he'd taken care of, housed, whatever he needed. He'd become homeless. And 2 weeks before this, he'd come to me and he'd said, "Mom, do you remember me talking about Cody?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, he found out where we live and it worries me." And I said, "What do you mean it worries you?" And he said, "Well, I don't want to get you too concerned, but it does worry me." And I said, do you need me to do anything?" He said, "No, I think I've got it handled, but I'll let you know." And then 2 weeks later, he's walking through the apartment complex. This man, he was only 19 at the time, actually, held a knife to the back of my son's neck, causing Corey to turn his head abruptly, gouging my son's neck very close to the artery. Corey jumped up and caused 2 lacerations across the top of his knees because he was at a metal picnic table. And when he did that, this young man ran a knife completely through my son on his right side, all the way through his liver and out through the front of his body. Corey walked home 2 blocks, bled 2.5 liters internally, and his younger brother, by 1 year and 3 weeks, found him bleeding to death in our home and came running downstairs and said, "Mom, Corey's upstairs. He can't talk. I don't see any bleeding," because he was bleeding internally. He said, "But I think it's life-threatening and I need you to come upstairs." So I ran upstairs, and I was just in time to find my son coming out of the bathroom. And when he came out of the bathroom, he couldn't speak. He was trying to scream. And I said, "Corey, come here." And when he turned toward me, he walked toward me 2 or 3 steps, sat down on his bed, his eyes rolled back, and he fell into my arms, and he died. I told him he couldn't do this. He needed to breathe, and he, being the son that he always did what his mother told him to, he took a deep breath, and as he brought his arms back, I saw the cut in his stomach, and at that point, we alerted the people that were on the phone with my son on, the EMS or EMTs, whomever it was, that there was a cut also in his stomach, and to hurry up. That was the first time that he was revived, and then he was brought back 4 times in total, and he ended up dying after 36 hours of a stroke. My son was attacked on July 27th, 2013, and he died July 28th, 2013. So it was then escalated to a homicide. When I came out, I said, "Where is my advocate?" And they said, "We're sorry, but until this murder is solved, you will not receive an advocate." And that pissed me off, because after being in social work for 25 years and being there for everyone, at the moment that I needed someone, no one was there for me. And I did not feel that that was right. And I did not feel that any woman should ever have to face that moment when she's being told that her son is dead without someone being there to help her through that process. And in less than a year, we had already founded Corey's Network and already received our 501c3, and we were serving other individuals.
Okay. That would, I'm speechless. I have no words. I'm sorry that you had to go through that, and that happened to your family, and it's a horrible tragedy and a loss. I couldn't imagine bearing one of my children.
I don't want you to imagine that, Ken. What I want you to know is that if it happens to you, that we're here to help you.
Okay. So very tragic story, obviously. But that would crush a lot of people. I grew up in a place where those kinds of things did happen, unfortunately. And then we move on. So I have lost a lot of friends and dealt with their parents, and I've dealt with a lot of loss in my life as well. Never a child, and I couldn't imagine it. And not having an advocate or someone to talk to in that moment, most people break. But you said, "I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make sure that when another mom has to deal with this, that she doesn't have to do it alone." How long after them saying, "Oh, you don't have an advocate," until the trial's over, which I don't know how long the trial took, but in my experience, it's anywhere between 2 and 15 years for the trials to be done and the sentencing to happen and the appeals to be over and all of those things. how long was it when you found out you weren't getting an advocate until the investigation was over, where you said, I'm not going to let another mom do this alone?
It was pretty quick. The first thing you have to understand is that I told them the night it happened who did it. Mom's intuition 99% of the time is right on. However, the investigator was a sex crimes investigator. I'm in a mixed marriage. My husband is a Black man, and we have 3 sons between us that are gay. And so they automatically assumed in my primarily white city that there had to have been something wrong with our family, because we were such a diverse family that that there had to have been something wrong. And so they immediately jumped to, there must have been some kind of a sexual relationship between Corey and his younger brother that found him and was trying to save his life. And they immediately went to his younger brother killed him. And they dismissed my statement that Cody was the one who killed him. So for 3.5 years, they interrogated my younger son 5 times, and they tried to say I was an accessory to the crime. So this woman who had been trying to keep our community safe from rapists and thieves and murderers and drug dealers and gangbangers and trying to turn people around was then the person who was supposedly the criminal. So I was pissed pretty quick. Not only was I fighting to get my son's crime solved, but I was also fighting to keep my other son and myself out of prison. So it happened pretty quick for us. I want to put in a real quick note here. Corey did save 5 lives through donation of his organs. He also gave sight to 2 people. And he also enhanced other people's lives through donation of his tissue, his bone marrow, his bones, his veins, and his blood. So there were all those other people he helped. So that was an extra added benefit. But then I immediately knew that I needed to get on the news, and I needed to make sure that my family's reputation was sterling in the area. So I immediately started getting with my media contacts, because if you look at all those different things that I told you I did, I'd already known how to deal with media. I already knew how to deal with the courts. I already knew how to deal with the police. I already knew how to deal with all of that. The other problem that I was facing immediately is I did not have insurance on Corey. So I had to beg the community to help me pay for my son's funeral. It is not cheap. And that meant that I was thrown into every person's nightmare. I'd been everything to my son. I've been able to help him. I nursed him, I fed him, I clothed him, I put him to bed. I'd done everything for my son. And here's the one time that he needed me most, and I couldn't bury my son. So I had to beg people to help me. And that is probably the most embarrassing thing I've ever had to do. So all of those things that we were having to fight for immediately, it didn't give me a moment to even sit back and say, okay, I can grieve my son right now. I didn't have a moment. I had to fight for one son's life. I had to keep myself out of jail. I had to pay for my son's funeral. And I had to somehow still pay my own bills. It was almost impossible. So how did it come to, I have to do this for other people? You start watching the news and you realize, if it's happening to me, it's happening to the woman who just had her son murdered yesterday.
Right.
It's happening to the man whose daughter was murdered this morning. It's happening to this person whose mom was killed last night, or this person whose sister was murdered. And in Kansas City, we have a lot of murders. And I know in St. Louis, they're off the charts.
Yes.
Okay. So if it's happening to me, it's happening to them. And that's part of the social worker's mind. I can't sit back and say, I could have helped you, and I chose not to. And if you think of all those different things that I'd done investigating sexual abuse, I had investigation skills. I had case management skills. I had media skills. I knew how to talk to cops. I knew how to play all kinds of ways in our community that would be able to help people through this kind of stuff. And if I knew how to do that, why would I sit on my butt and say, well, I can do it for me, but I'm not going to do it for you?
Right.
So I started almost immediately helping people, at least verbally. If somebody would have something that they needed done or something like that, people were already starting to send people to me and saying, hey, call my friend Shelly. She's going through it too, but she's doing it this way. Like one of the first things we learned is that Crime Stoppers, and that's a national thing, your TIPS hotline, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you do a $500 donation towards your reward for your loved one's case, they'll give you a press release to all of the different media sponsors in the area. Okay? But you only get 3 minutes per each person. So you'll sit there and talk to an anchor or somebody for 30 minutes, right? You and I both know you're going to get maybe 1.5 minutes worth of time.
Airtime.
Right?
Yep.
Not worth it. Not worth it at all. But I get $5,000 back from crime victims' compensation from my son's funeral. What am I going to do with that $5,000? I'm going to put it on my son's reward. Why am I going to put $5,000 on his reward all at one time and get only 3 minutes for 5 stations when I can do $500 10 times and get 3 minutes per each station? Now all of a sudden, you've got 3 minutes for 5 stations. That's 15 minutes. Times 10, you now have 150 minutes of airtime.
Okay. So understanding how to navigate those systems and awareness is, at that point in time, probably the most important thing.
Exactly. And being able to know that Crime Stoppers is also the way you get your billboards put up for free.
Okay.
I knew that. I also knew how to talk to my people in my government, because some of them were my friends.
Right.
I also knew how to talk to the police department. I knew how to start like a chain of evidence and documentation on my side, because I've been a social worker since God created Earth. So I started doing all of these things for myself. And when people started calling me, I would say, no, don't call your police officers. Send them an email so you've got proof that you have tried to contact them. Please don't do that. Don't call them, because they can say, well, I never got the message. When you send them an email, you've got proof that you've sent them an email. And when they don't answer the email, you send it up the chain of command.
Right. But what you don't have proof, and I've been in court enough times in my life, you don't have proof that they read it unless they responded in some way. And it's a bad, like, America is the greatest country on the planet, I think, at this moment in time, but it's not perfect by far. And our legal system, I think, is just in a miserable state across the board, in so many different ways. It's not about what's right. It's about who's right, more times than not. And it's just not something I'm super proud of for America today.
Anyways, it's very frustrating for people that already feel like they're being lost in the system, because they feel like nobody's listening to them, nobody cares about them. You've got 4 murders. We had 6 murders actually over the weekend. And you've got 8 people that work in the homicide unit, and you've still got all these other murders to be able to try to solve. How are you not going to be lost? How do you stand out? How do you make sure that people will remember that Corey Lakovich was a person? My son was a person, and he is going to have his case solved.
Right.
Okay. And if he doesn't have his case solved, you're going to have this harpy woman down your throat 2 or 3 times a week. And if you don't answer my emails, then I'm going to send it up to your sergeant. And if your sergeant doesn't respond, I'm going to send it to his captain. And if your captain doesn't respond, I'm going to send it to the major. And if he doesn't respond, I'm going to send it to the chief. And if he doesn't respond, I know the senator. And sometimes it gets that bad. And you know what? It's okay, because if Corey was alive, I'd be fighting for him just as hard. Just because someone is dead doesn't mean you quit fighting that hard for them.
Corey's not in your life anymore, and not.
I would disagree, but go ahead.
Physically, he's not physically there anymore for you.
True.
And you're starting. Is it a 503c?
501c3.
501c. 501c3, which I've started one of those as well. It's not free, and it's not easy, right? And you're dealing with all this during this investigation. How did you get the money to get this started? And find the time and energy? Like, that's a big undertaking in a moment where I feel like I would just be really weak, physically and emotionally to move forward. So, how did you move forward, get the money, get all this god awful paperwork done that you have to go through? And it's not a small task, right? It's not like getting an LLC.
No, it's not. You're right. You have to go through incorporation and bylaws, and you have to get your tax ID, and you have to go through the 15 pages plus addendums, and yada, 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 yada. Number one, you have to be used to doing it. Mm-hmm. And I'm used to doing it because like I said, I've worked for nonprofits for, it's going to keep growing 150 years. It's going to be since, 2003 before Christ, BC. But I've been there for a long time doing these things. So I knew what they were looking for. I knew what they wanted in a 501c3. So I was able to do it pretty quickly. The money part, when Corey was murdered, I was actually working as an instructor of sociology, critical thinking, and psychology at a local career college. And Corey was one of my students, not my student, but he was a student at the school.
Right.
And so he couldn't be one of my students, favoritism. So he was in like the other half of the school. So if the student didn't have me as their teacher, they definitely had him as one of their classmates. So they were all very invested in the fact that one of the kids in their school got murdered, and their mom, the kid's mom was one of their teachers. So they were very heartbroken. And because of that, Corey was graduated posthumously from his school. And when I went there to pick up his diploma at the graduation, I went onto the stage, and it was kind of a cute little production. They brought me up on stage, and then they tried to keep me there for a moment. And when they kept me there for a moment, and I'm like looking really confused, all of my board of directors came up behind me, and they actually gave me the money to start.
Wonderful.
So
that's the power of community.
It is the power of community. And of course, the class that he would have graduated with gave a standing ovation and asked me to say something, and all I could say was, I love you.
Thank you.
So,
wow, that's inspiring. That the community came together for you and your family to help other people, right? They wouldn't do that just for you. They might have done it just for you, but knowing that you were going to take this and then grow and help other families is probably a big factor in why you got that fund. Is Corey's Network a Kansas City local foundation, or are you growing nationwide?
It's kind of a local, but we have helped people in Texas. We've helped people in Topeka and Lawrence. We've helped people in St. Louis. We've helped people, up towards the north. And it kind of depends. If you can kind of show us a connection to Kansas City, we're pretty open to helping you.
Right.
We've cremated someone that was killed in Arkansas but lived in Kansas City. So we cremated him in Arkansas and then helped him get home. It just depends.
So so Corey's Network provides services, post homicide of all different kinds, financial services, support services as well.
We help people get in contact with a good counselor. Kind of what happens is if you want to do like a referral to me, what you do is you go on to coreysnetwork.org, which is a way if anyone listening wants to look at us up, it's Corey's Network, and Corey is spelled Corey. So you don't look up some other Corey, but coreysnetwork.org. And you would go on to our services page, and there's a CNI referral. And on that, it says, at the very end, it says we're affiliated with other programs. And this is something that I insisted upon when I first started this, because a lot of social work programs, they do what's called siloing. Mm-hmm. And that means that, we're competing with other people for money and et cetera. So, this is my client. I'm going to hold on to my client. You can't help my client. What we do instead is we've created a network, which is true to its name, which is why it's not called Corey's all-encompassing program and you can't help. So what you do is you go through the process of going through the referral form itself, and then at the end it says, we're affiliated with other programs. Do we have your permission to share your information with these other programs? If you say yes, your information is automatically shared with Ad Hoc Group Against Crime, Mama on a Mission, Healing Pathways, Aim for Peace, Parents of Murdered Children, Grieving Loved Ones Workshop, the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department, the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, the Independence Mayor's Office, and if you're murdered in Independence, and if you're murdered in Kansas City, Missouri, then it's going to also go to the Kansas City, Missouri Mayor's Office. And if you say yes, you were killed in Kansas City, Missouri, then it goes to the KC, Missouri Police Department, blah, blah, blah. So there's different buttons that you push, and because of the different buttons, it'll go to these different areas. But because of that, what we're able to do then is instantaneously, all of those different community programs then receive the information. So it would say Michelle Norris has 3 kids under the age of 17. There are 2 males and a female. These are their ages. And that information is then sent to Healing Pathways, which delivers free grief counseling for children under the age of 17. The names are not shared. In that way, HIPAA rules are taken care of. So no one else in the chain of information is being told their information. And then Healing Pathways, instead of that family having to go out and say, can you help me? Healing Pathways says, I can help you.
That's it for today's show, folks. If you'd like to join my text line community, the number is 314-370-2871. All you have to do to join that text line is send me any question about business or technology. I'll do all the research, and I'll give you an absolutely free, totally unbiased answer. Get to work.